Welcome to the Olive Grove. You know how much we love digging deep, and today we're going to be diving into Isaiah chapter 66.
From the complete Jewish Bible translation.
Yes.
Very important.
Buckle up because we're going to be exploring some really interesting concepts like God's relationship with humanity,
Yeah.
the millennial reign, and what it really means to connect with God.
And this chapter, I mean, this is not just some like abstract theological, ideas. It gets very specific. It gets graphic. It paints a really vivid picture of what's to come.
Absolutely. And right from the start, verse 1,
Yeah.
this is a powerful scene.
Yeah.
God describes heaven as his throne and the earth as his footstool.
Right.
It's almost like a king looking over his domain,
Yeah.
but with this hint of longing, would you say?
What's interesting about that is that I think it does point to a tension there, a gap between God's desired closeness and the current state of things. He's not fully present in the way he yearns to be.
So it's less about a king on a throne and more about what? A parent leaning down, wanting to be closer to their child.
Yeah.
Is that...
Beautiful analogy. I love that. And that the theme that kind of runs throughout this chapter, God desires connection. He wants that, but it's not forced, right? He gives us choices, and those choices have consequences. And I think we see that pretty clearly in verses 2 through 4.
Okay, so these verses talk about those with a disabled spirit, which sounds a bit harsh at first glance.
Yeah.
Now, it's not a physical disability. Right?
Not at all, no. The Hebrew word that's used here implies a spirit that's been humbled, even crushed, like by the weight of God's glory and just the brokenness of the world. It's almost like this acute awareness of the gap between our human limitations and God's infinite power.
So those with a disabled spirit are the ones who are keenly aware of their need for God.
Precisely. Yeah, they're the ones who tremble at his word, recognizing his authority.
Yeah.
And it's contrasted with those who might go through the religious motions. They check all the boxes.
Right.
But they lack that heart connection. And the text actually says that God will enjoy making fools of them.
Wow.
Which is kind of a stark warning, I think, against just empty rituals.
It makes you think about how easy it is to get caught up in outward appearances, checking those boxes,
Yeah.
instead of cultivating that deep inner relationship with God.
Absolutely. And that tension, that division, plays out even within the Jewish people, as described in verses 5 and 6.
Okay.
You have those who accept Yeshua as the Messiah and those who reject him. And their fates are dramatically different.
One group is welcomed into God's glory, while the other.
Yeah.
Though the imagery here is quite intense. There's like uproar in the city, sound from the temple.
Yeah.
It's almost like this chaotic separation.
What's important to understand is that this isn't just like some abstract theological debate.
Right.
This has real consequences. It determines one's eternal destiny.
Wow.
It's not about ethnicity or lineage. It's about a heart that's surrendered to God's plan.
And that plan, according to Isaiah, includes a dramatic shift.
Yes.
A sudden change.
Yes.
It's depicted in verses 7 through 9. It's like a nation being born in a day.
It's like, bam, there it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that birth imagery, I mean, it's so powerful.
Yes.
It conveys the inevitability of God's plan, this unstoppable arrival of the millennial kingdom, a time of restoration, renewal.
Right.
Just as a woman in labor, she can't halt the process midway.
Right.
Nothing can hinder the coming of this kingdom.
So for those looking at the state of the world and feeling overwhelmed by chaos and injustice,
Yeah,
this offers a powerful message of hope.
it does.
Change is coming,
Yes.
and it's going to be radical.
And that change isn't limited to, some far-off future. I mean, we see it happening right now, albeit on a smaller scale within individuals.
Yeah.
And communities who are embracing God's truth and allowing it to transform their lives. So, before we took that little detour to talk about ways you can connect with us and support the ministries that fuel this podcast, we were talking about Jerusalem's transformation. Ah, yes, verses 10 through 13.
Yeah.
And it's just such a beautiful shift from that chaos and division we were talking about earlier.
Right.
Like watching a city go from ruins to restoration right in front of your eyes.
Yeah, it's a striking image, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Isaiah is describing this transition of Jerusalem from a place of wickedness to this city that's bathed in God's glory.
Yeah.
It becomes a source of joy and comfort, particularly for those who have mourned over its fallen state.
It makes me wonder, have you ever mourned for Jerusalem? And I'm not just talking about the physical city,
Right.
but what it represents. A place where God's presence was once so tangible, yet now it seems so distant.
Yeah, that's a powerful question to ponder. And, Isaiah suggests that those who grieve over Jerusalem's current state, those are the ones who are going to experience the deepest joy
Yeah.
when it's restored.
Yeah.
They'll recognize the magnitude of that transformation, the fulfillment of God's promises.
It's like those who have known deep sorrow can truly appreciate profound joy.
Their hearts are attuned to the contrast, to the depth of God's redemption.
Precisely. But, let's not forget, Isaiah doesn't shy away from some of the harder truths either.
Right.
Just a few verses later, 14 through 16, we encounter this stark juxtaposition,
Yeah.
between those who embrace God and those who reject him.
Yeah.
And it's powerful visual. God's people are flourishing like this vibrant new grass,
Right.
while his enemies are facing judgment like a raging fire.
Yeah, that imagery really packs a punch.
Yeah.
It's not subtle at all,
It's not.
and it really makes you confront the seriousness of the choice that we all face,
Yeah.
to align ourselves with God's plan or to go our own way.
And remember, as we talked about earlier, this isn't about earning God's favor through some outward rituals or, checking off boxes.
Yeah.
Verses 17 through 19, they dive into the heart of the matter, right? They expose this futility of self-consecration, trying to manufacture righteousness apart from Yeshua.
So it's not enough to just look the part, to perform religious actions without that genuine heart transformation.
Exactly. God sees through all the facades. He sees through all our attempts to impress him with our own efforts.
Right.
True righteousness, it comes from surrendering to his grace, acknowledging our need for him, and allowing his spirit to work in us.
It's a humbling thought, isn't it?
It is.
We can't earn our way into God's good graces.
Right.
It's a gift freely given to those who humbly accept it.
And that brings us back to, I think, the central point of division, within the Jewish community that Isaiah keeps returning to. That acceptance or rejection of Yeshua.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't just an intellectual exercise. This is the dividing line between those who embrace God's ordained path to salvation and those who cling to their own self-righteousness.
Right, which ultimately leads to very different outcomes, as Isaiah so vividly illustrates.
Now, some might find this concept of judgment, kind of unsettling.
Sure.
But I think it's important to understand it through the lens of God's holiness and justice.
It's like, imagine a perfectly clear, crystal vase, right?
Yeah.
And then someone comes along and smashes it into pieces.
Yeah.
The damage is done, the beauty's shattered. You can't just ignore it or brush it aside.
Right. And sin, in a sense, is like that. It's
Yeah.
like that act of shattering. It disrupts the harmony of God's perfect creation.
Right.
And while he offers forgiveness and restoration through Yeshua, those who persistently reject that offer,
Yeah.
who refuse to acknowledge the brokenness they've caused,
Yeah?
they're choosing separation from his presence.
Because they can't exist in that state of brokenness in the presence of perfect wholeness.
Right.
It's like trying to mix oil and water.
Yeah, they don't belong together.
Right.
And I think that's what's being depicted here. It's not about God being vindictive. It's about the natural consequence of rejecting his offer of healing and choosing to remain in a state that's incompatible with his perfect nature.
Now, going back to the millennial kingdom, I'm struck by how Isaiah presents this vision of peace and restoration alongside this sobering reminder of judgment.
Right.
He doesn't shy away from the complexities,
No, he doesn't.
even in paradise.
That's what I find so fascinating about this chapter.
Yeah.
Even in the midst of describing the glories of this millennial reign, he includes this detail. The corpses of those who rebelled against God, they'll remain.
Wow.
It's this stark visual, a reminder that even in the perfection of God's kingdom, the consequences of sin aren't just erased.
So it's not like this blissful ignorance, this pretending like those who rejected God never existed.
Not at all.
Wow.
It suggests a profound level of accountability,
Yeah.
even amidst the celebration and the joy.
Right.
It really challenges our tendency to compartmentalize things, to want the blessings without acknowledging the reality of judgment.
Which, let's be honest, we all do that at times.
Yeah, we do.
We want the good stuff without facing the hard truths.
Right.
But Isaiah 66 forces us to confront that whole picture. It's a tapestry woven with threads of grace and judgment, mercy and justice.
Yes.
And it challenges us to wrestle with the complexity of God's character
Yeah.
and the implications of our choices.
Absolutely. And For our listeners who might be new to this concept of the millennial reign,
Right.
it's worth noting that there are different interpretations
Right.
within Christianity regarding its timing and nature.
Yeah, some view it as a literal 1,000-year period where Christ physically reigns on earth,
Right.
while others see it as a more symbolic representation of a time when God's righteousness prevails.
Right.
But regardless of which interpretation you lean towards, the core message of Isaiah 66 remains relevant.
It does.
God's plan is in motion.
Ah.
His kingdom is coming.
Yes.
And our choices in this life have eternal implications.
They do, and that's what makes this chapter so compelling.
Yeah.
It speaks to the deepest longings of the human heart for justice, for peace, for a world where God's presence is fully realized. But it also challenges us to examine our own lives,
Yeah.
our own motivations, and to ensure that we're aligned with His will.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, we encourage you to sit with these concepts, to grapple with the complexities of God's character and plan, and to allow Isaiah 66 to challenge your assumptions
Yeah.
and deepen your understanding of what it truly means to follow him.
Yeah, the journey of faith is rarely neat and tidy, right? It's filled with questions, doubts, sometimes even wrestling with difficult truths.
Right.
But it's in those moments of wrestling that we often experience the most profound growth.
Welcome back to the Olive Grove. It's amazing how much ground we've covered in Isaiah 66, and yet
Yeah,
I feel like there's still so much to unpack.
always.
And as we kind of wrap up this deep dive,
Mm-hmm.
I keep coming back to this theme of God's just incredible love for humanity.
Yeah.
It just permeates the entire chapter.
It really does. And it's not this like vague, sentimental kind of love. It's deeply personal, intensely passionate, but yet, uncompromising in its pursuit of righteousness.
Right. It's like a parent who disciplines their child out of love, not because they enjoy punishing them,
Yeah.
but because they're trying to shape them and refine them and draw them closer to what's ultimately good and true.
That's a great analogy. And we see that dynamic, I think, beautifully illustrated in those contrasting destinies that are laid out in Isaiah 66, Flourishing, joy, deep connection for those who embrace God's plan, while those who stubbornly resist His grace, they face judgment and separation. It's not a matter of God being arbitrarily, nice or mean,
Right.
but rather it's a natural consequence of aligning with or rejecting His holy nature.
And that brings us to these final verses, 22 through 24, which describe the new heavens and the new earth,
Yes.
the ultimate culmination of God's redemptive plan. It's
Yeah.
like a glimpse into paradise restored, this world where God's presence is fully realized and his people, they live in perfect harmony
Right.
with him and with each other.
And yet, even in this idyllic setting, Isaiah doesn't shy away from that reality of judgment.
Yeah.
He describes the corpses of those who rebelled against God remaining as this stark reminder of the eternal consequences of rejecting His grace. It's a powerful image, isn't it?
It is. Even amidst the beauty and the joy,
Yeah.
there's that acknowledgement that choices have weight,
Right.
that our actions in this life echo into eternity.
I love that. It's almost like a shadow cast by the light of God's glory.
Yeah.
It doesn't diminish the beauty,
Right.
but it adds a depth, a complexity to it that prevents it from becoming, I don't know, shallow or sentimental.
Right. It's not a sugar-coated fairy tale.
No.
It's raw. It's honest.
Yes, it is. And it's a depiction of God's unwavering love and justice intertwined.
Yeah.
He offers us a choice, a path to redemption,
Yeah.
but He doesn't force us to walk it.
So as we conclude this deep dive,
Yeah.
I think the most important question for each of us to consider is this. Which path will we choose? Will we embrace God's invitation to relationship, to walk in humility and surrender,
Uh-huh.
and experience the fullness of his blessings?
Mm.
Or will we cling to our own self-righteousness, our own attempts to control and manipulate our way into his favor,
Right.
ultimately facing those consequences of rebellion? The choice is ours. And as Isaiah 66 makes abundantly clear,
It does.
it's a choice with eternal implications.
sobering, but yet incredibly hopeful,
It is.
because it reminds us that we have agency.
Yeah.
We have the power to choose life, to choose connection, to choose a path that leads to flourishing and joy.
Absolutely.
What a powerful message to carry with us as we navigate, just the complexities of our own faith journeys.
Indeed. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Isaiah 66.
Well, sad to see it end,
I know.
but hopefully,
More to come.
yes. And we hope that this exploration has challenged you and encouraged you and deepened your understanding of God's heart.
And his plan for humanity. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the Olive Grove Podcast on YouTube and visit the My Christian Space website for early access to new episodes and additional resources.
You got it.
Until next time, may you walk in the fullness of God's grace and truth.